This ingenious arrangement of my long-headed old friend prospered in every way, save where it encountered a force that often defeats the most cunning schemes. I mean nothing else than the pleasure of a woman. For, let her cousin and sovereign send what command he chose, or Colonel Sapt chose for him, and let Marshal Strakenz insist as he would, the Princess Flavia was in no way minded to rest at Tarlenheim, while her lover lay wounded at Zenda. And when the Marshal, with a small suite, rode forth from Tarlenheim on the way to Zenda, the Princess's carriage followed immediately behind. And in this order they passed through the town, where the report was already rife that the King, going the night before to remonstrate with his brother in all friendliness, for that he held one of the King's friends in confinement in the castle, had been most traitorously set upon, that there had been a desperate conflict, that the Duke was slain with several of his gentlemen, and that the King, wounded as he was, had seized and held the castle of Zenda. All of which talk made, as may be supposed, a mighty excitement, and the wires were set in motion, and the tidings came to Strelsau only just after orders had been sent thither to parade the troops, and overawe the dissatisfied quarters of the town with a display of force. Thus the Princess Flavia came to Zenda, and as she drove up the hill with the Marshal riding by the wheel, and still imploring her to return in obedience to the King's orders, Fritz von Tarlenheim, with the Prisoner of Zenda, came to the edge of the forest. I had revived from my swoon, and walked, resting on Fritz's arm, and looking out from the cover of the trees I saw the Princess. Suddenly understanding, from a glance at my companion's face, that we must not meet her, I sank on my knees behind a clump of bushes. But there was one whom we had forgotten, but who had followed us, and was not disposed to let slip the chance of earning a smile, and maybe a crown or two. And while we lay hidden, the little farm girl came by us, and ran to the Princess, curtsying and crying, "Madame, the King is here, in the bushes. May I guide you to him, madame?" "Nonsense, child," said old Strakenz. "The King lies wounded in the castle." "Yes, sir, he's wounded, I know, but he's there, with Count Fritz, and not at the castle," she persisted. "Is he in two places, or are there two kings?" asked Flavia, bewildered. "And how should he be here?" "He pursued a gentleman, madame, and they fought till Count Fritz came, and the other gentleman took my father's horse from me and rode away. But the King is here with Count Fritz. Why, madame, is there another man in Ruritania like the King?" "No, my child," said Flavia softly. I was told it afterwards. And she smiled and gave the girl money. "I will go and see this gentleman." And she rose to alight from the carriage. But at this moment Sapt came riding from the castle, and seeing the Princess, made the best of a bad job, and cried to her that the King was well tended and in no danger. "In the castle?" she asked. "Where else, madame?" said he, bowing. "But this girl says he is yonder, with Count Fritz." Sapt turned his eyes on the child with an incredulous smile. "Every fine gentleman is a king to such," said he. "Why, he's as like the King as one pea to another, madame," cried the girl, a little shaken, but still obstinate. Sapt started round. The old Marshal's face asked unspoken questions. Flavia's glance was no less eloquent. Suspicion spreads quick. "I'll ride myself and see this man," said Sapt hastily. "Nay, I'll come myself," said the Princess. "Then come alone," he whispered. And she, obedient to the strange hinting in his face, prayed the Marshal and the rest to wait, and she and Sapt came on foot towards where we lay, Sapt waving to the farm girl to keep at a distance. And when I saw them coming, I sat in a sad heap on the ground, and buried my face in my hands. I could not look at her. Fritz knelt by me, laying his hand on my shoulder. "Speak low, whatever you say," I heard Sapt whisper as they came up. And the next thing I heard was a low cry, half of joy, half of fear, from the Princess. "It is he! Are you hurt?" And she fell on the ground by me, and gently pulled my hands away, but I kept my eyes to the ground. "It is the King," she said. "Pray, Colonel Sapt, tell me where lay the wit of the joke you played on me?" We answered none of us. We three were silent before her. Regardless of them, she threw her arms round my neck and kissed me. Then Sapt spoke in a low, hoarse whisper. "It is not the King. Don't kiss him. He is not the King." She drew back for a moment. Then, with an arm still round my neck, she asked in superb indignation: "Do I not know my love? Rudolf, my love!" "It is not the King," said old Sapt again, and a sudden sob broke from tender-hearted Fritz. It was the sob that told her no comedy was afoot. "He is the King!" she cried. "It is the King's face, the King's ring, my ring! It is my love!" "Your love, madame," said old Sapt, "but not the King. The King is there in the castle. This gentleman—" "Look at me, Rudolf, look at me!" she cried, taking my face between her hands. "Why do you let them torment me? Tell me what it means." Then I spoke, gazing into her eyes. "God forgive me, madame," I said. "I am not the King." I felt her hands clutch my cheeks. She gazed at me as never man's face was scanned yet. And I, silent again, saw wonder born, and doubt grow, and terror spring to life as she looked. And very gradually the grasp of her hand slackened. She turned to Sapt, to Fritz, and back to me. Then suddenly she reeled forward and fell in my arms, and with a great cry of pain I gathered her to me and kissed her lips. Sapt laid his hand on my arm. I looked up in his face, and I laid her softly on the ground and stood up, looking on her, cursing heaven that young Rupert's sword had spared me for this sharper pang. Chapter 20